trial data or Johnson & Johnson. I'm here to tell you that I'm not going to get ahead of the experts who you will all get to hear from in the next hour in our public health briefing from the COVID response team. They will discuss this more with you and what everything means then. At Wednesday's briefing, I also shared some of the engagement and outreach the White House is doing to move forward the American Rescue Plan. From the president and the vice president on down, that work has continued and accelerated. Yesterday, senior staff spoke again to governors about the challenges they are facing and the importance of relief. Today, National Economic Council Deputy Director David Kamen will meet with the Council of State Governments. The Office of Public Engagement will also brief Black civic groups, anti-hunger and nutrition advocates, and key progressive groups and invite their feedback. These conversations are, of course, critical to building support and moving the president's bill forward. But we also saw evidence this week that the American people overwhelmingly want their elected leaders to work with the president to confront the pandemic and and put people back to work. According to a Monmouth poll released Wednesday, 71% of the American people want Republicans in Congress to work with President Biden. That number is up nearly 10 points from right after the election, meaning the trend of support for working in a bipartisan manner with the president is only growing. Finally, the president is committed to getting relief to working families. Hence, he is also meeting this morning with his members of his economic team, with the vice president and Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen for a briefing on the cost of inaction and the impact of a delay in moving forward with a relief package. Millions of Americans don't have enough food to eat, and millions more have lost their jobs. But interest rates are at historic lows, and that means it's the right time to make smart investments. Moody's, a Wall Street firm, has said that we could end up with 4 million fewer jobs this year if we don't act on the president's plan. That's 4 million Americans who could get back to work. And I'm sure they will discuss all of that at their briefing later this morning. Last thing, we are venturing to provide a week ahead to all of you, or return to providing a week ahead to all of you. So a quick preview. Next Monday, the president will meet with the Secretary of State at the State Department. On Tuesday, President Biden will deliver remarks and sign an executive order advancing his priority to modernize our immigration system. And Friday is, of course, Jobs Day, and the president will deliver remarks about the economy. We'll have hopefully more over the next couple of days, but we wanted to provide as many details as we could. With that, Zeke, why don't you kick us off?
Jen, just one foreign policy wanted to get going. With violence surging in Afghanistan, is the president still committed to winding down operations there and bringing troops home this year?
I have not spoken with our national security team about this in particular, but his commitment remains.
At the top, you mentioned that Americans should follow public health guidance. One of the challenges it has been over the course of the last 10 months is that public health guidance from state to state varies. Some states have mask mandates, others have indoor dining open, others have schools open, others don't. What guidance should the American people follow? Their governor's guidance, or should they follow the president's?
Well, first, what we're venturing to do is provide more concrete guidance from the federal government, from the CDC, from health and medical experts on the important steps all of the American people can take to keep themselves safe. That includes the importance of mask wearing, of course, and how vital that is to keeping us safe. It also includes the importance of hand washing, of restricting travel. These are all guidelines that have come in recent days and weeks, I should say, from the President of the United States and from our medical and health experts. But in addition, as we discussed yesterday, there are guidelines including the safe reopening of schools that he signed an executive order on, directing both the Department of Education and HHS and the CDC, I should say, to produce those guidelines to give more specific advice and markers to states and local school districts on what they should follow. So it will ultimately be up to states, to governors, to local school districts and others to make determinations, but we do want to provide more clear guidance from the federal government based on the expertise of health and medical experts on what people should follow and what will help keep the American people safe.
I just want to follow up on that one. The CDC study that was discussed here a couple of days ago, one of its recommendations as part of reopening schools immediately was to close indoor dining, restaurants, and bars. Is that a part of the federal guidance that we should be expecting to see from the CDC and the Department of Education soon?
Well, the good news is you get to hear from our director of the CDC, I believe, in about 45 minutes, and our medical and health experts, and you can certainly ask them if there's going to be any updated guidance. Go ahead.
Dr. Fauci says the U.S. may not be able to meet that goal of reopening most K-8 schools in 100 days because of the trajectory of the pandemic. Given that, is the president going to adjust his goal of trying to get all these schools reopened in 100 days?
Well, as we talked about a little bit yesterday, the president wants to not only reopen schools, he wants the schools to stay open, and but he does rely on the guidance of his health and medical experts, and obviously he's not going to do anything that is not safe and doesn't keep teachers, students, and our school districts safe. But a key part of this is the guidelines, as we mentioned, the executive order he signed to ensure that school districts are getting the information they need and clarity they need on what steps that they should take to keep their students safe and teachers safe, of course, but it is also funding. And we've talked about this quite a bit in here. And the American Rescue Plan is pivotal for a number of reasons, including ensuring that Americans have food on the table, including that we can get shots into the arms of people across the country, but also that school districts, especially public schools, have the funding they need to take steps on everything from ventilation to PPE to testing. And the longer that's delayed, the harder it's going to be to meet that goal.
Got it. And has President Biden spoken to former President Trump since taking office? And if so, can you give us any update on what President Trump said in his letter to President Biden?
I don't have any update. I don't have any calls to report on. There are no calls to report on, I should say, and I don't have any update on the letter. And as I said when we talked about this about a week and a half ago, it seems longer than that, I'm going to acknowledge. The president, of course, thought the letter was gracious and generous, but he plans to keep it private. Go ahead.
I understand you don't want to get too much into the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, given the data that's out there, but this likely won't be the only vaccine that is less effective than the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccines. And so I wonder, what is the president's message to those Americans who would be more reluctant to get one of those less effective vaccines? And are you concerned about the impact that would have, given how many doses have already been bought on the front?
Well, first, when the president announced his plan earlier this week to ensure we have enough vaccines to give every American 2 shots by the end of the summer with the purchase of Moderna and Pfizer vaccines, he was doing that without the need for additional vaccines approved. Obviously, if additional vaccines, Johnson & Johnson or any others, go through the FDA approval process, that's a positive step, right? No doubt about that. But he purchased these large orders for vaccines that we'll have by the end of this summer to get into the arms of Americans to ensure that we would be able to do that even without any of those steps moving forward.
And so he would encourage Americans to get any vaccine that is approved by the FDA for emergency use authorization?
Well, again, we're not going to get ahead of the FDA. I'm not suggesting you're asking that, but we'll rely on our health and medical experts to advise if there are additional vaccines, if and when, I'll be optimistic, that are approved by the FDA and how that will impact our vaccine distribution plan.
And secondly, on the coronavirus relief bill, in his first month in office, President Obama traveled to a number of key states to drum up support for the Recovery Act. Does President Biden have any plans to do something similar to drum up support for his $1.9 trillion coronavirus relief bill?
Well, then Vice President Biden also traveled to a number of states to drum up support for the American Recovery Act at the time. And obviously we weren't dealing with a pandemic, so the circumstances were quite different. But he fully recognizes, as do we, the importance of speaking directly to the American people about the components of this package, whether it's the importance of funding to get schools schools open, or get vaccines in the arms of Americans, or just ensure that people know they can put food on the table. And so we're having to take a number of creative steps to do that, whether that's direct television or local media, or from the president, the vice president, and others. We're doing that, whether it is engaging with governors and local elected officials to ensure that we're answering all of the questions they have and that they can convey to the public. So we're taking a number of creative steps, a little outside of the box. Certainly his preference would be to get on a plane and fly around the country, but that's not a step we're planning currently.
As a candidate, President Biden did travel a fair amount, especially in the final weeks of the campaign. He's now received both doses of the vaccine, and a number of safety precautions are in place and could be in place for his travel. So why wouldn't he be traveling, or is that something?
Well, it's also about keeping the public safe, and we're not going to do a rally with 20,000 people. That wouldn't be a recommendation made by our health and medical experts.
Right, but there wouldn't be any plans to travel without a crowd and to go out into the country?
We may travel, certainly, but I have nothing to preview for you at this point in time. What I'm conveying is that it is vital for the president and the vice president and every member of our team to be speaking directly to the American people. And so we're looking for creative ways to do that.
Could I ask you a foreign policy question? After Alexei Navalny was poisoned last summer, then candidate Biden said there was no doubt that the Kremlin was responsible for his poisoning, and he vowed to, quote, hold the Putin regime accountable. This week you told us that the president conveyed his concerns to President Putin, but he hasn't yet taken any action to hold Russia accountable. So I wonder, does President Biden hold President Putin directly responsible for the poisoning of Alexei Navalny? And if so, why hasn't he yet taken sanctions action to punish Russia for its actions?
Well, first, the president spoke with President Putin earlier this week, as you know, and he did not hold back in his concerns about a number of the actions of the Kremlin and of the Russian government. But there is a review underway that we have spoken about a bit in here by our national security team, and we'll let that review carry forward. That includes the SolarWinds breach. It includes the poisoning of Alexei Navalny. It includes I'm kind of losing my thought here, but it includes a number of steps, a number of concerning actions they've taken. We want that review to carry forward and to be completed, and the president always reserves the right to respond in the manner of his choosing and at the time of his choosing.
Does he hold President Putin responsible for the attempted assassination of Alexei Navalny?
We're going to let the review carry forward, and then I'm sure we'll have more to say about it at that point in time. Go ahead.
Thank you, Jen. The New York Attorney General released a report yesterday saying that the state had undercounted the number of COVID deaths by as much as 50% in nursing homes. Would President Biden support a federal investigation into what happened and Governor Andrew Cuomo's role?
I've seen those reports. I would say any investigation, I would point you to the Department of Justice.
Does the White House think that it should be looked into further?
Again, any investigation would be led by the Department of Justice. We're in a new age. They're independent, and they will determine what paths they take moving forward.
Okay, on immigration, I know you said yesterday that it was never 100% that today was going to be Immigration Day, that it was just an early draft and things changed. But can you help us understand what exactly changed and why it's taking a little bit longer for these executive orders and actions on immigration to execute?
Sure. It's of course been widely reported that the president is planning to announce his task force, or now plans to announce his launch of a task force on reunifying families and children, something that is he's personally committed to, his wife, Dr. Biden, is personally committed to and invested in, and he will plan to make that announcement next Tuesday. The task force will be led by Secretary of Homeland Security once he's confirmed, Ali Mayorkas, and we had planned to sign that executive order today, or at the end of this week, I should say. Early plans sometimes do change, and that was a draft plan, which those change many times, I can assure you, from sitting through many scheduling meetings. But we had planned to do it this week because we'd hoped that Ali Mayorkas would be confirmed by the end of this week. But because of the filibuster of his nomination, we expect him to be confirmed on Monday evening, and therefore the president will sign it on Tuesday, and then Secretary Mayorkas will be overseeing that moving forward.
Okay, one more question, a foreign one. Can you give us just a little bit more of a timeline in terms of how much longer you think it will take for the White House to engage with Iran on its nuclear program? Because you had one of Iran's top diplomats saying yesterday that it believes the window is closing.
Well, I'm not going to give a timeline on it. Obviously, it requires Iran complying with the requirements of the nuclear deal. We've said previously, but I will reiterate here, that the president also sees it as an opportunity to build on the plan from there. And I apologize, I just want to make sure I give you the exact language. He believes that through follow-on diplomacy, the U.S. should seek to lengthen and strengthen these nuclear constraints and address other issues of concern, including Iran's ballistic missiles program and its regional activity. But again, Iran must resume compliance with the significant nuclear constraints under the deal. Now, he's also talked about, and thematically we've talked about, how working with our partners and allies, including the Europeans, members of the P5+1, is pivotal to any engagement moving forward, of course, including on what the future of the Iran nuclear deal is. Go ahead.
Thank you, Jen. Just a follow-up on Iran. Would the president consider meeting with his Iranian counterpart, Hossein Rouhani, and maybe following President Obama's example, for a starter, have a telephone conversation with him?
I think we're getting a little bit ahead of where we are in the process. Again, the first step here is for Iran to comply with the significant nuclear constraints under the deal. But I am certain we will continue to discuss this issue in here and at the State Department and other parts of government. Go ahead.
In the wake
Steve
of-
Holland.
Oh, hi.
I didn't even recognize you with your mask for a second.
Just to follow up on Jeremy's question,
Yes.
did President Biden specifically call on President Putin to release Alexei Navalny?
Yes, as we have publicly, as our team has repeatedly called for through the course of the last several weeks. In terms of the specifics of the conversation, I don't have any more details for you on that.
We don't know what Putin said, or did he make any promises?
I don't have anything to read out on President Putin's comments, no.
In the wake of the GameStop trading incident, is there a public role the White House can play in educating people about the dangers of this type trading?
Well, Steve, I know the SEC issued a new statement earlier this morning or just before I came out here, and I'd certainly point you to that and others to that. And we, of course, respect the role of regulatory agencies. They are closely monitoring the situation, but it's under their purview at this point in time. And I guess part of our education can be conveying to people that the SEC is the regulatory body that would oversee this and can speak to it further. Go ahead.
Thanks, Jen. Two on Capitol security. So the acting chief of police up on Capitol Hill has recommended a permanent fencing around the Capitol. I was wondering if the Biden White House or President Biden himself has any thoughts on this, if permanent fencing is the right answer, or does it project the wrong picture to the American public?
I'm not sure we're going to have any comment on that specifically, but I'm happy to talk to our National Security, Homeland Security team if we have anything further to add.
Sure, and a quick follow-up. Speaker Pelosi said, I believe it was yesterday, that she feels that threats are coming from inside the House, with other members being allowed to carry guns. Of course, we have conspiracy theorists among the ranks of the GOP now. Does the White House agree with that assessment that there is security threats coming from inside the House? Has Biden spoken to Pelosi, and is he worried about the safety, the physical safety of members of Congress?
Well, he speaks with Speaker Pelosi on a regular basis and certainly has reiterated his support for her and members of the caucus. And he has spoken publicly about his concerns about the rhetoric, of course, around the events of January 6th, but some of the rhetoric that has continued and the role of social media platforms. So he is in close touch with her about events on the Capitol, about the safety of members, but I don't think I have anything more for you to read out beyond that. Go ahead in the back.
Thank you, Jen. Two quick foreign and one domestic, if that's okay. Can you confirm officially that Robert Malley's been appointed special envoy for Iran? Is that?
I can. I believe it was announced this morning, yes? Or I guess I can confirm it here, too, for you.
And then as you know, settlements have been a major obstacle to getting the Palestinians back to the negotiating table. Would President Biden consider it? Does he believe settlements should be halted in the West Bank so that the Palestinians will come back?
I don't have any new comments from President Biden on this or the current circumstance. He's obviously spoken to this particular issue in the past and conveyed that he doesn't believe security assistance should be tied, but I don't have anything more for you on the path forward toward a two-state solution.
Following up on the Capitol Hill fence, there's a fence outside here, a temporary one around the White House. It's been up since last summer. President Trump took a lot of criticism for it. Would President Biden consider bringing that fence down so people can take photos in front of the White House again?
Well, I think we'd all like that, including members of my family and people in Washington. But I will talk to our security team and see if there's anything further to convey to all of you. Go ahead.
As you guys are thinking about the task force to reunite the parents and the separated children, what are you sort of learning about the scope of that challenge? Since it's something that groups have tried to do in the past and failed, how many people do you think would need to be tasked to that to actually make it effective?
Those are excellent questions, and I expect that when we announce, when the president signs the executive order next week, when we put the task force together, when Alan Mayorkas is confirmed as the Secretary of Homeland Security, maybe we'll have him come to this briefing room, or I'm officially inviting him here today to come to this briefing room. But there's no question that we recognize this is going to be incredibly challenging, that there will be a lot of work to be done, that is why this will be a priority. It's not only a priority for the president, but will be a priority for Secretary Mayorkas, but I will leave it to him and to others at the Department of Homeland Security to outline and preview for you the path forward. Go ahead.
Thank you, Jen. I know that President Biden and the First Lady are acutely aware of the sacrifices that military families make. That being said, we had an incident with the garage with the National Guard that was kind of embarrassing, and now I'm hearing from spouses of Guards members that they had a COVID outbreak and were not tested or vaccinated before they arrived in D.C. And I'm wondering if there's any concern by the president about how these Guardsmen are being treated, whether he can do anything specifically to safeguard their health before they arrive, while they're here. Can he get vaccinations to and testing to governors specifically for the purpose of providing some health safeguards to these soldiers?
Well, as you noted at the beginning of your question, but I would just reiterate the role of the National Guard, and I've spoken to the president about this directly, and the incredible sacrifices they make is something that is personal to him, given his family connection to the National Guard. He had called the head of the National Guard just last week when the reports came out about the treatment of the National Guard and the fact that many had been sleeping in garages, and of course conveyed his dismay of the photos he had seen and their treatment, and also offered his personally any help that he could provide, even if it was boosting morale. And certainly that line of communication remains open should there be something that he can do from his end. In terms of specific prioritization of the vaccine, I would point you to the Department of Defense and leaders over there to speak to that more specifically.
Okay, one follow-up to that. On the question of Speaker Pelosi's concern about the enemy within, has the president been briefed on such a threat? And does he agree that the National Guard should be here until mid-March during the impeachment trial?
I'll speak to Liz Sherwood-Randall and our Department of Homeland Security, our Homeland Security colleagues here to see if there's more specifics we have from our end, but I would point you to the Department of Defense and the National Guard team otherwise.
Question is on print cooler from
Sure, go ahead.
reporter from WUSA. The reporter asks, I've learned that the IRS employees nationwide are having telework suspended. They're all being called back into the office. This despite an OMB directive issued Tuesday ordering federal agencies to only allow 25% capacity in federal buildings. If IRS employees have been doing telework successfully, why is now the time to bring them all back into the office? Is that safe?
I would point you to the Department of Treasury where the IRS is located for any further comment on that. Go ahead. Oh, sorry, I'll come to you next, too.
Jen, just on the Defense Production Act, you've been asked a few times in these briefings about any specific instances of the Defense Production Act being used. Yesterday, the Chief of Staff, Ron Klain, suggested that it was being used as it relates to the production of N95 masks. Is there anything specific you can tell us on that, or any other companies or products where the Defense Production Act is being used now?
Well, we're not going to get into specific companies. Obviously, there are procurement processes here, but also that take place at federal agencies, but also we're still early in the process. It was invoked just last week, but I can give you more specific detail in terms of how we plan to use it on vaccine supply. I think one of the products that Ron Klain spoke about was low dead space syringes, which are the key to getting the 6th dose out of the Pfizer vial. Pivotal in getting more vaccines out into the public. N95 masks, isolation gowns, nitro gloves, again, safety and keeping people safe from infection, pipette tips and high absorbency foam swabs for testing, and then lipid nanoparticles, which are key to the mRNA vaccine, and bioreactor bags, which is what the vaccine is mass produced in. So as you can tell, a lot of this is materials that will help ensure that the vaccine can be used by vaccinators and transported in some cases to vaccine locations. So there's several components of it and very specific materials that we're focused on.
And then at the National Security Agency, Michael Ellis, a Trump political appointee, was installed as the general counsel, which is a career position, as you know. Are you guys considering reviewing that decision or attempting to remove Michael Ellis from his position as general counsel of the NSA?
I don't have anything new for you on that other than I don't have any personnel announcements. Certainly we're reviewing personnel across government, including political appointees, most of whom have left, but I don't have anything new on any decisions there. Go ahead. Oh, wait, I promised you. Go ahead.
Thanks, Jen. FEMA has requested active duty troops be used at vaccination centers when they get stood up across the country. Does the White House support that request?
I did ask our team about this. You or someone else may have asked about this the other day, and I think I have something on it here. One moment. Thanks for your patience. Lots to say about COVID, no doubt about it. So, let's see. Let me talk to our team about it. I know I've seen that request from FEMA. Obviously, part of our objective is ensuring that we have vaccinators on the ground. I know that's not what you're asking about, but also the ability to move materials and move vaccines. So we are tapping into any resource we can, but it's more predominantly focused on kind of a health and medical core, and that the ability to get those people into communities. But I will check with our team and get you something more specific.
Just one on double masking. There's been some increased discussion about that publicly. We've seen pictures of the president double masking and those around him. Is that a personal preference, or has he been advised by his medical advisors to do that?
Well, you're going to talk to the medical advisors in just the next 15, 30 minutes, whatever the time is, and you can ask them more specifically. There hasn't been specific CDC guidance. As you have probably seen, Dr. Fauci spoke to this, I believe, in the last couple of days and said it was common sense or made sense. I can't remember exactly how he phrased it, but there hasn't been additional medical guidance given. I've been around the president where he's been wearing one mask. I think obviously he abides by the health and medical advice. Sometimes, not to get too detailed, but it looks like two masks sometimes because we put the N95 one on. It's a little bit more comfortable to have this one on top of it. But I would encourage you to ask the health and medical team during the call that's coming up. Go ahead.
Jen, did the White House have advance notice of the Johnson & Johnson results, and did that affect the White House's decision to go ahead and purchase 200 million doses from Pfizer and Moderna?
No, the decision was made to purchase the Pfizer and Moderna doses to ensure that we had enough doses to give 2 shots to Americans by the end of the summer. And we did our planning without the need for an additional vaccine to go through approval. Now, remember, even though we saw the news this morning, it hasn't gone through FDA approval yet. We don't have a timeline of when that will happen. We leave that to the FDA. Go ahead.
Thank you. A couple questions on the economy, starting with China. Former President Trump signed a Phase 1 trade deal with Beijing. Does President Biden consider that deal still to be in effect, and does he expect China to meet its commitments under that deal?
Well, the national security team, the newly confirmed Secretary of State, President Biden, are all reviewing all aspects of our national security approach, including certainly our relationship with China. We are focused on approaching that relationship from a position of strength, and that means coordinating and communicating with our allies and partners about how we're going to work with China. It means strengthening our economy at home, and it means determining the best path forward to address a range of issues, not just economic, but strategic and also security. So again, everything's under review, but I don't have anything for you on the China relationship.
Sorry, to clarify, so it is still in effect as the past administration left it off?
Well, again, everything that the past administration has put in place is under review as it relates to our national security approach, so I would not assume things are moving forward. We are just reviewing what the path forward looks like and doing that, again, from a position of strength, which means coordinating with our allies, members of Congress, and making a determination before we engage further. Go ahead.
Sorry, Jen. Can you confirm the Politico story about the president warning his family members to avoid any conflict of interest with his presidency and their business ties?
Well, I'm not going to get into private conversations between the president and his family members. We all have lots of conversations with different family members, I'm sure. The president is committed to ensuring we have the most ethically vigorous administration in history, and that includes restrictions on how his image can be used, and that is something that he's conveyed publicly and privately as well. So let me just reiterate the policy for all of you, which is, I think, maybe your next question, or I'll just reiterate it proactively. It's the White House's policy that the president's name should not be used in connection with any commercial activities to suggest or in any way that could reasonably be understood to imply his endorsement or support. He's issued the farthest-reaching executive order with respect to the ethical commitments required of his appointees ever, and is very proud of it. And that's something that he is committed to conveying to anyone it applies to. Let me just get to a few more in the back. Go ahead, all the way in the back.
Thank you very much. Does President Biden endorse the characterization of genocide concerning the Chinese treatment of the Uyghur minority?
Yes, the Secretary Blinken, I almost called him President Blinken. I'm giving him a bit of a promotion. Never know. He spoke about that during his confirmation hearing, so I would certainly point you to those comments.
President Biden.
He was speaking on behalf of the U.S. government. Did you have a question right there? Go ahead.
The governor of Puerto Rico said last week he was in touch with the White House about releasing remaining disaster relief funds held up by the previous administration. Do you have an update on that?
I don't, but I will venture to talk to our team about what the status of relief funds is for Puerto Rico.
One other question. Is the White House tracking the confirmed cases of the South African strain that have been found in South Carolina? Have you been in touch with local officials there?
Certainly our health and medical team have been, and again, they'll speak to it at their briefing that's coming up at 11 a.m. I encourage you to join that. But as we see reports, our team has been monitoring variants as there have been developments around the world and the potential for them to travel here. It reiterates or reemphasizes, I should say, the importance of getting vaccines into the arms of Americans, something that our health team has said will make people safer, and also reiterates the need for getting the American Rescue Plan passed so that we can ensure we can expedite that effort. Go ahead.
Thanks, Jen. Just two quick questions. One following up on the political question. To that degree, is the White House going to make a commitment one way or the other that members of Biden's family are just not going to serve in the administration?
We've made that commitment, so that continues to be the commitment.
For Valerie Biden or anybody else?
No, reports that there was an office in the West Wing were not accurate.
Gotcha. And then one on Marjorie Taylor Greene. I know you said earlier that you would not like to be commenting on her, but it's a major story. Does the White House have any concerns about a QAnon supporter, someone with a history of racist? Now we're seeing anti-Semitic comments, harassing school shooting survivor families, serving on House committees.
Well, I think the reason I conveyed that is because we don't want to elevate conspiracy theories further in the briefing room. So I'm going to leave it at that, and we'll leave decisions about committees to members of Congress, and we've certainly seen Speaker Pelosi speak to that. Go ahead.
Thank you. 24 Republican senators sent a letter to President Biden yesterday requesting a meeting after some of the executive orders and actions targeting the domestic energy sector. Is that a meeting that President Biden will take?
Well, President Biden is committed to, and this you can see this through his actions, working and engaging with Democrats and Republicans to address the crises we're facing, including climate, which is one of the crises that he's identified. We don't have no plans for a meeting of that kind that I can read out for you at this point in time. Sounds like a lot of people to be in a meeting during COVID too, but he is certainly engaged on an individual basis with leaders in the Senate, members of Democratic and Republican senators, and they can certainly raise any concerns they have through that means.
And one more question, and apologies if you answered this in response to Steve's question, but I just want to be clear here. Do you anticipate President Biden to address the GameStop controversy when he meets with his economic team a little bit later this morning?
No. Do we anticipate him addressing it publicly, you mean?
No, just talking about it with his economic team.
Well, the focus of the meeting is about the recovery plan, about the status of the economic recovery, about obviously the data that we saw yesterday. I'm sure they'll cover a range of topics during that meeting, but that's not the focus.
Story. Okay.
I know it's a big story, but doesn't, obviously our focus and our big story is getting the American people back to work. Go ahead.
I know hundreds of White House staffers now have been vaccinated for the coronavirus. Any specific updates in terms of who that is, who's being covered by that, and then also more broadly, because of that, does that give the White House sort of, is that a model for the rest of the country? Schools, for instance, should every teacher be vaccinated in the next 90 days so that the president can meet his commitments to opening schools?
Sure. Well, on the first, I think we announced a couple of weeks ago that about 36 members of the senior White House staff, including members of the cabinet, national security officials, had received their first dose, which means right around now a number of people will be receiving their second dose. We are also, as you noted, had released a couple of days ago that the objective and the plan of the White House Medical Unit was to vaccinate hundreds of additional staffers to create a COVID-safe environment here. As you know, there has been the president has, and our team, I should say, has spoken about the prioritization, of course, of teachers and educators and child care providers. We'd certainly defer to CDC on what that should look like, and they may speak to that on this 11 a.m. call as well, but I'm not going to get ahead of their outlines or prioritization or specifics.
And just one more on GameStop, not to belabor the point, but
I love the effort. You guys are trying so hard on this.
what is the broader message to the American public and people around the world that in large cases individual investors acting collectively against large financial institutions are shut down pretty much overnight, while the big banks and financial institutions responsible for the 2008 housing crisis got a get out of jail free card?
Well, the message is that the U.S. government is starting to work how it should. The SEC is a regulatory agency that oversees and monitors developments along these lines. It is currently in their purview. They've put out several statements this week. We will certainly defer to them on that, and I'd point you to them for further questions. Go ahead in the back.
Thank you. Jen, can we expect to see the president in this briefing room anytime soon?
Are you eager to see him? Is that what you're saying?
Sure.
The president took questions earlier this week when he did an event, and we certainly are going to look for opportunities to continue to do that. The location of where the questions will take place, I don't think I have anything further, but we'll look for additional opportunities for him to take additional questions from all of you. Go ahead.
Thank you, Jen. What does President Biden make of reports that Senate Democrats, including Bernie Sanders, who will chair the Budget Committee, which is chairing the Budget Committee, are planning to expand the use of the budget reconciliation process for legislation that's not revenue, does not directly impact federal revenue, like the $15 minimum wage? Is that something that President Biden is okay with?
Well, the president is going to leave it to Congress to determine the parliamentary process for moving legislation forward, as should be the case. I think it's obviously been broadly reported that there is consideration on the American Rescue Plan of what the path forward will look like and how to expedite moving that forward. And there's an urgency, and we certainly feel that. But our view is that this bill should be bipartisan. 74% of the public support it, and we want Republicans to work with Republicans on fighting COVID and putting the American people back to work. But as we work on this bill, if we are going to, our priority is on getting it through and not on the focus on what the parliamentary process is.
What is his message to progressives who are arguing that the $1.9 trillion relief package should be the floor and not the ceiling? And would President Biden consider pushing a relief bill that is more than $2 million? What about the idea of reoccurring stimulus checks that some progressives are advocating for?
Well, we've seen those reports, and obviously he's had conversations, as our team has, with members of the Progressive Caucus and other progressive members of Congress. And as I've said in here many times before, I mean, part of this process is that the president laid out his vision. He is getting feedback. A lot of the focus in here has been members who have said it's too big, but some are saying it's too small. And as a part of the discussion, we have those engagements and determine how to improve the bill and what opportunities there are to do exactly that. So he welcomes their engagement. He welcomes their ideas, but he's put forward his plan, and his main bottom line is that we're not going to break it apart, and the three components of it are pivotal in moving it forward. But the size and the scope of the package, this is the legislative process. This is democracy at work now.
Certainly he has an opinion, and that's very influential in the process. So would he think it's realistic to go above $2 trillion?
Well, again, I think the best place to look for what's realistic is to members of Congress and their whip counts, and I'm sure that the leadership can give you an assessment of that. Go ahead.
Is there any chance that the Summit for Democracy, which was mentioned during the campaign, could happen before summer?
Before summer?
Yeah.
I don't have any. I know it was a campaign promise and something that was mentioned during the campaign, but I don't have any more details on plans at this point in time. Go ahead.
Yesterday we saw Vice President Harris do local media interviews in the states of West Virginia and Arizona. Obviously there's been a lot of focus on your efforts to get Republicans on board. Are you concerned that budget reconciliation even, may not be realistic or that you may lose some Democrats? Is that why Vice President Harris was making those calls to shore up Democratic support?
Vice President Harris was making those calls because we want to make the case to the American people across the country. And obviously, she's not traveling to those states and holding big events or even events with, not big crowds, but some crowd. And so this was a way to do exactly that.
Why those states specifically?
I think she'll do a number of more regional calls and regional interviews, as will other members of the team, and including on national networks, of course, and that will continue in the days ahead. Go ahead.
One more on your favorite topic, reconciliation. I know it's wonky, but
that's okay. That's what we're here for. The policy's back.
The president, as you said multiple times, is reaching out to Republicans in an effort to get a bipartisan bill. At the same time, Majority Leader Schumer and Speaker Pelosi seem to be aggressively moving towards reconciliation. Does the president think that the Democratic leader's push for reconciliation at this time is hurting his chances to get Republicans on board?
Well, the president's focus is on the end goal of delivering relief to the American people, not the parliamentary procedures, as we've said. And we can't imagine that the 1 in 7 families who are hungry or the thousands who've lost a loved one to COVID care much about the procedure either. So I would flip it the other way to you. I think a fair question you might ask our GOP or Republican colleagues is why they oppose proposals that have the support of 74% of the American public. And even if this bill moves forward through the reconciliation process, again, a parliamentary procedure, it doesn't mean they can't vote for it. And the president's objective and focus is to continue to have those conversations and pursue a path forward where he can gain bipartisan support. But again, the public, 74% of the public is with him in that endeavor. and their constituents. Go ahead,
The
Steve.
president spoke with the Nato Secretary General the other day. Is the president satisfied with the level of defense spending by NATO allies?
Well, we did.
Come up in their conversation.
I know we put out a readout of that and a fun video, if I may note, of his conversation with the UN Secretary General. He had spoken about the importance of NATO allies and partners. Playing the role and contributing their fair share when he was vice president. That remains his commitment, but I don't have any more detail of the call than what has already been read out.
Thank you, Pam.
Thank you, guys. Have a great day. Oh, let me do one more thing. So it's important to me, but also to the president, that everybody know everybody on the press team. So I'm just going to embarrass TJ, who you guys all know, and Kareen, who are two deputies in the press office, Principal Deputy Kareen, Deputy TJ, who you all should know, the public should know. They're going to be pivotal faces, and they play an important role. So thank you, everyone. Have a great Friday.
Thank you.
All right, we've just been listening to Jen Psaki giving a briefing on a wide variety of topics, the nearly $2 trillion COVID relief plan, the use of the Defense Production Act to get things going. When will schools be open? Can they be opened in the next 100 days? Security and talk of a permanent perimeter around the Capitol. Now, to parse through what is important and what is not, let us bring in Ed O'Keefe, who has been standing by outside the White House, where, as I understand it, it's frigid. So I appreciate you standing there. That was a much longer briefing than we all expected. So I guess actually, to tell you the truth, before we I'll ask an umbrella question, which was, she talked about a lot of different issues. What were some of the most important ones for you?
Yes, it is a double space heater kind of morning here. Good morning, guys. And that was a big. What's the word I want? A salad bowl of questions and answers there in that briefing. I think the one thing I heard that is notable is that they are now doling out just a little bit more detail about this immigration plan that the president's going to introduce next week, or some of the executive actions that he'll take to start revamping immigration policy, and sort of tea-leafed and signaled that part of the delay is they want the Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas to be there. His vote is now scheduled, excuse me, hairball. His vote is now scheduled for Monday night. They were hoping it would be this week, but it was put off by the fact that he's become the first Biden cabinet nominee to face the filibuster rules, and they have to do the procedural votes, which they held yesterday, and so now they'll hold the vote Monday night. So that is part of the delay. The other, we think, is that they are, you make campaign promises and then you get in, you look under the hood and you realize things are a little different. Based on the reporting we've done, there's some belief that in some of the details of what they were hoping to do, they may have learned some different things, and that may have delayed it as well. All this to say, it's coming next week. It sounds like that'll be a big theme next week. Beyond that, I think they're also signaling here a lot of the questions on the specifics of the COVID response, the vaccine, the plans to reopen or to change rules are now being deferred to the medical and science professionals and those whose day job it is to respond to this pandemic, and not necessarily to have it done by the political professionals like Jen Psaki, they're the press secretary. So that is going to lead to a sort of difference between this administration and the previous one in terms of when and how we ask questions and from whom we get the answers. So, shameless plug, I think we're planning to carry the COVID briefing, which begins at the top of the hour, which is supposed to be led by officials from the CDC, Health and Human Services, and the White House COVID response coordinator, Jeff Zients. This is one of the promised 3 a week that these professionals will be doing. Remember, at the beginning of the pandemic, there was some of that going on here at the White House, but then those briefings were overtaken by the president. Then they had to postpone them because they were causing political damage. Then he revived them again, and they really just kind of became campaign events. The idea here is to have the professionals do it, keep the political folks out of it, keep the president out of it, unless it's a really serious situation. And we'll see how helpful they are in answering some specific questions we're going to have for them in terms of the COVID response.
Ed, she mentioned also briefly the president's $1.9 trillion coronavirus relief bill. Democrats in Congress and the White House have rejected a Republican pitch to split President Biden's COVID-19 relief bill. So What do you think is going to be the legislative priority here?
They've rejected it so far. Let's remember, this is going to take several weeks for Congress to sort out, because there are going to be proposals, as there has been from the president. There are going to be conversations. We're anticipating a possible counter-proposal from that bipartisan group of senators, the group of the Sweet 16, who have been putting together, who put together the plan that essentially was passed late last year, the $900 billion in relief. And yet, on top of that, we're going to start to see the Democratic-controlled House as early as next week start to push this forward, with the argument being, look, we're not going to waste any time. We're happy to have Republican support for this, but if not, we're going to get going ourselves. So for now, at least, the idea of bifurcating this proposal into two or more than two potential separate proposals is off the table for Democrats, who for now, and it's only Friday, intend to go at it with one big piece of legislation.
All right, Ed O'Keefe, thank you, Ed. Please get warm. I know even with those space heaters, it doesn't always do the job. We appreciate you braving these temperatures for us. Thank you.
Anytime. Have a good weekend, guys.
You too. You too. And as Ed mentioned, Anne-Marie, we are going to be bringing our viewers that COVID task force meeting when it happens probably at the top of the hour. So stick around for that.
Yep, 8 minutes or so. Congresswoman Liz Cheney, the third-ranking House Republican, is facing major blowback over her vote to impeach former President Donald Trump. You will recall the Wyoming lawmaker was one of 10 Republicans who voted to impeach Mr. Trump for incitement of insurrection following the January 6th attack on the Capitol. Now, some of Cheney's GOP colleagues are calling on her to resign from her leadership position, while back home she's facing an early primary challenger for the state's lone House seat. But despite the backlash, Cheney insists that she is, quote, not going anywhere. So with more on this, we are joined now by a politics reporter for the Casper Star Tribune, Nick Reynolds. Thanks for joining us, Nick. Wow, I mean, Liz Cheney is probably the last person who anyone would think her Republican credentials would be called into question, but suddenly that is what is happening. Cheney is one of 10 Republicans to vote against President Trump. How is her vote to impeach the president being perceived in her home state by her supporters?
I'd certainly say that depends on who you talk to. It's been a really mixed response here. While Trump's influence on GOP politics in the state's been really deniable, the Republican Party here is not homogenous. Most polls I've seen have shown a near even split in the number of Republicans loyal to the president, and vice versa here, you sort of see a similar divide. Cheney's a powerful Republican, and Wyoming is a Republican state for more reasons just than for its support of Trump. And the recent executive orders regarding fossil fuel drilling on federal land, I would argue has caused probably an even greater level of discomfort for Wyoming residents that are vote to impeach. And I think people recognize that you need someone in a position of power to fight back against that. And for a lot of people, Cheney is that person.
Yeah, I mean, as you know, Florida Congressman Matt Gaetz spoke to crowds yesterday in Wyoming, and he wasn't shy about his feelings for Congresswoman Cheney. I want to play a bit of what he had to say.
I'll confess to you, this is my first time in Wyoming. I've been here for about an hour, and I feel like I already know the place a lot better than your misguided representative, Liz Cheney.
That is, I mean, it's just a weird thing to say. You've been there for an hour and you feel like you already know more than the Congresswoman who is in the district who was raised there. You know, it's like a rock band showing up in your town and saying that they love it, even though they don't even know where they are half the time. How is that appearance in Wyoming translating into the infight for the Republican Party? Because I would think that, somebody showing up even in my district from out of state to badmouth a fellow New Yorker, for example, to put it in the context here, would not be seen as something that people would find tantalizing. But I know that he did draw a crowd.
Yeah, that was a really interesting quotation. Honestly, when I was there, I sort of perceived it as him more saying that he identified with the same type of populism that Trump supporters really tend to identify with. And for the people there, that was really a universal feeling. I saw as many Trump hats as I did anything else there. It was a really enthusiastic crowd. But I know that wasn't felt universally. Last night, the former Speaker of the House in Wyoming tweeted about not having interlopers in the state's politics. And my social media feed has had as many people who are thrilled about what Matt Gaetz had to say in his vision for the state, as opposed to those who are really not happy to have an out-of-stater here. I think yesterday on Fox News, Senator Cynthia Lummis actually did say that she wasn't exactly a fan of people from out of state coming in and telling people what to do. And Wyoming voters, in that sense, are really independent, and they make their own decisions. I think that's something that Lummis recognized in that interview yesterday, and that's something that I think people need to keep in mind as we kind of try and make sense of what his visit here actually meant.
Yeah, well, it sort of smacks of political opportunism, and that being said, now Liz Cheney is set to face some challengers from within her own party for the 2022 election. Who are the main contenders?
At this point, obviously, the first person to step forward is State Senator Anthony Bouchard, who's been a fixture of Wyoming politics for a very long time. At the beginning of the decade, he was the founder of a no-compromise gun rights group called Wyoming Gun Owners that's now currently under control by the Dorr brothers, who run a national organization of similar like-minded groups. Bouchard's popularity has actually been increasing over the last couple of years. We anticipated his seat to be a pretty close race in the Republican primaries when he was facing against former staffer for Governor Mark Gordon, Aaron Johnson, and he ended up winning by close to double figures, which was a real surprise for us given how close many of his previous races have been. He then faced one of the best-funded Democratic state house candidates that we've ever had and won that race pretty handily, joining in the success of a number of different Republican seats here. Trump's popularity is huge in Wyoming, and that had an undeniable impact on this year's election results. We saw a number of races we expected to be close for Democrats in the Cheyenne area, for example, that went to Republicans for the sheer fact that people just turned out for Trump. We saw that throughout other areas of the state as well. Sweetwater County, which has been blue for decades at this point, went to Republicans for the first time in a really long time, which shows that there was a sign there. And talking to voters here, the main priority, again, was oil. It wasn't just a support for Trump. They were really concerned about the future for fossil fuels. So that's a real driving force in this. Whether we see other candidates emerge from the fold, that's still an open question. We've had a few people already file who are relative unknowns of Wyoming politics, a small-town mayor, just a regular person from Cheyenne. We've also heard suggestions that Brian Miller, who ran against Cynthia Lummis in the 2020 Republican primaries for the U.S. Senate, could also run. And Darren Smith, who ran against Liz Cheney back in 2016 and did, I'd say, about 15% of the vote. He has also suggested to Wyoming Public Radio he could run. And the Trumps, as we saw in that memo that was given to Politico yesterday, have already been polling other candidates. I think they used Casper Republican Representative Chuck Gray as a proxy in that poll.
So what about efforts from establishment Republicans to support Liz Cheney? Is that resonating? Because I'm just curious if in the course of your reporting you found that for most people, being a Republican means being loyal to Trump. It just strikes me that Liz Cheney, if that's how they feel, or if they feel that there are other things that go into making you a supporter of the Republican Party and its historical platforms and positions, which to me, Liz Cheney seems to imbibe that. But maybe in people in Wyoming see that it's all about Trump, and if you go against Trump, then you can't call yourself a Republican.
Yeah, and that's where it gets really complicated. We have had this infighting for a long time, and there are some clear factions in the Republican conference in the state house here. But politics in Wyoming works a lot differently than other areas in the state. Our most recent Speaker of the House was a high school football coach full-time. Our current Speaker of the House is a veterinarian. Our Senate President is a newspaper publisher. Our politics really work by your relationships and how you work in small towns. And to some people, there's been a buy-in to the nationalization of Republican politics that really resembles what we've seen in states like Oregon and Texas and Arizona especially. But a lot of how things work here is still based on small town relationships. And Liz Cheney's done a lot in that aspect. She's brought Sonny Perdue out into the rangelands to deal with a problem that we've been having with managing prairie dogs. I remember covering that a while ago. She's been at Casper Chamber of Commerce luncheons with John Barrasso. That's really how politics works here. And ultimately, I think a lot of power in the state still comes from, I guess, prominent Republicans' relationships with their own communities. Most of our towns are about 5,000 to 10,000 people. And when you're in there, you really need personal relationships, and you need a lot of friends in a lot of different pockets of the state. And, that takes time. And if you deliver results, they're going to have your back. We've already seen that from endorsements from two of the state's biggest industry groups, the Wyoming Mining Association and the Wyoming Petroleum Association. Those organizations have huge memberships and very politically visible memberships. And for them to come out in support of Liz Cheney, that's a pretty huge statement.
All right, Nick Reynolds, really interesting insight and reporting from Casper, Wyoming. Thank you very much for spending some time with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
As promised, we are taking you to the White House COVID team and top federal health officials holding the virtual briefing to discuss the status of the Biden administration's pandemic response.
Encouraging trends in COVID-19 cases and hospital admissions, the occurrence of COVID-19 remains extraordinarily high in the United States. We continue to have over 4 times the daily number of cases as we had over the summer. Through January 27th, 25.4 million COVID-19 cases have been reported to CDC. During the week of January 21st to January 27th, the 7-day average of new cases decreased 16.6% to 161,832 per day. The 7-day average of new hospital admissions of patients with COVID-19 during the week of January 20th to January 26th decreased by 14% to 12,720 per day. However, over 99,000 people were hospitalized with COVID-19 on January 26th. 427,626 deaths have been reported since January 22nd through January 22nd, 2020. During the week of January 21st to January 27th, the 7-day average number of deaths increased 7.5% to 3,277 per day. And yesterday, we saw our 6th day of over 4,000 deaths. We continue to remain concerned about the emergence of variants in the United States and are rapidly ramping up surveillance and sequencing activities as we work to closely monitor and identify variants as they emerge. Any information we have, we will then share with you as rapidly as possible. The B.1.1.7 variant that was first detected in the UK has now been confirmed in 379 cases in 29 states as of January 27th. Yesterday, South Carolina public health officials notified the public about the first 2 documented cases of the B.1.351 variant, which was officially first detected in South Africa and now in the United States. These cases were identified in different parts of the state and not believed to be epidemiologically linked. They each did not have any travel history. We are still learning more about their exposures. And earlier this week, Minnesota identified the first U.S. case of the P1 variant. This is the variant that originally emerged in Brazil. CDC will continue communicating with international, state, and local partners to monitor the presence and impact of variants in the United States and around the world. And we are actively working with national reference laboratories, state health departments, and researchers across the country to improve our understanding of these variants and how they may impact the pandemic. We also know viruses mutate, and they tend to mutate in ways that are advantageous to the virus. We expected this, and this is why I feel compelled to underscore for you the need for each of us to remain steadfast in our commitment to taking all of the appropriate steps to protect ourselves and our communities. You're going to hear me say this a lot, so here it is. Wear a mask, stay 6 feet apart, avoid crowds and poorly ventilated spaces. Also, now is not the time to travel. If you choose to travel, please follow the CDC guidelines and be aware that you must wear a mask as you travel. And when it's your turn, please roll up your sleeve and get vaccinated. If we do all these things, there is less virus spreading and the conditions that produce variants are lessened. And before I turn it over to Dr. Fauci, I would like to just address school reopenings, which I know has also been in the news a lot this week. CDC continues to recommend that K through 12 schools be the last setting to close after all other measures have been employed, and the first to reopen when they can do so safely. Accumulating data suggests school settings do not result in rapid spread of COVID-19 when mitigation measures are followed, including masking, decreasing density, and proper ventilation. Implementing community-based strategies that reduce transmission when there is a lot of virus in a particular area is also important to supporting the safe reopening of schools. But we recognize many communities lack sufficient capacity to do all that it is needed. That is why it is essential that the guidance, tools, and resources called for in the National Strategy for the COVID-19 Response and the American Rescue Plan are provided to communities. Thank you. I look forward to taking your questions in a few minutes, and I will now turn it over to Dr. Fauci. Dr. Fauci?
Thank you very much, Dr. Walensky. Well, as alluded to by Andy Slavitt, this past week, and particularly the past 24 hours, have been really interesting and I think value added to the issue of vaccine protection in the government attempt to contain this outbreak. In previous briefings, I had mentioned that the federal government had been involved in the development and/or facilitation of 3 separate platforms of vaccines. One was the mRNA, the other were vector, either an adenovector or a chimp vector, and the other was the soluble recombinant proteins. We all know now of the recent data that came with regard to Moderna and Pfizer with their mRNA showing a 94 to 95% efficacy and a very, very good efficacy against advanced or severe disease. Over the last 24 hours, there have been the announcements of 2 other trials that represent 2 additional platforms. One is the soluble protein platform in a study that came out of the UK using from the company Novavax. And the other one that we discussed this morning at a press conference at the NIH was the Janssen or Johnson & Johnson Adeno 26 trial that took place in the United States, in South Africa, and in Brazil. And the results really are very encouraging. Let me just very briefly outline for them for you, and then maybe make a couple of comments regarding nuances of the study. In the study that was just reported by Janssen, Johnson & Johnson, it was a trial using their Ad26, and the overall vaccine efficacy in the study was 66%, but for the United States, it was 72%. Now, the important issue, because the first thing people do is compare a 72% efficacy with the previously reported and other trials of 94 to 95%. That is true, but when one looks at the potential impact on a very important aspect of what we look at carefully is namely severe disease, that overall in the United States, in South Africa, and in Brazil, the overall efficacy for severe disease was 85%. And in fact, in the study, including in the South African isolate, there were essentially no hospitalizations or deaths in the vaccine group, whereas in the placebo group, there were. So this really tells us that we have now a value-added additional vaccine candidate that will, of course, as happens with every candidate, will present the details of their data to the FDA. But I want to point out that this has important potential and real implications both domestically and globally, because as many of you are aware of, this is a single shot vaccine in which you start to see efficacy anywhere from 7 to 10 days following the first and only shot. It is very, very good with regard to cold chain requirements, namely requiring only a refrigerator. It is inexpensive and the company is capable of making doses in the numbers of billions. Of note, and this is something that relates to what Dr. Walensky just said, we are being faced with variants. We're all aware of the variants that we knew dominated in the UK, the 117, the 351 in South Africa, and other variants such as the P1 in Brazil. When these variants were first recognized, it became clear that we had to look at in vitro, in the test tube, whether the antibodies that were induced by the vaccines that we had available would actually neutralize these new mutants. And it was reported in several preprint journals over the past couple of weeks that although it diminished, particularly the troublesome South African isolate, although it diminished the efficacy of the antibodies, it still was not below the cutoff where you would expect some degree of efficacy. But what we know now from this study, namely the J&J and the Novavax study, that antigenic variation, i.e. mutations that lead to different lineage, do have clinical consequences. Because as you can see, even though the long-range effect in the sense of severe disease is still handled reasonably well by the vaccines, this is a wake-up call to all of us that we will be dealing as the virus uses its devices to evade pressure, particularly immunological pressure, that we will continue to see the evolution of mutants. So that means that we, as a government, the companies, all of us that are in this together, will have to be nimble to be able to just adjust readily to make versions of the vaccine that actually are specifically directed towards whatever mutation is actually prevalent at any given time. And finally, this all tells us that it is an incentive to do what we've been saying all along, to vaccinate as many people as we can, as quickly as we possibly can, because mutations occur, because the virus has a playing field, as it were, to mutate. If you stop that and stop the replication, viruses cannot mutate if they don't replicate. And that's the reason to continue to do what we're doing, namely intensify our ability and our implementation to vaccinate as many people as possible, as quickly as possible. So now I'll hand it back to Andy Slavitt. Andy?
Thank you, Dr. Fauci. Before I turn it over to all of you for some questions, I want to offer a few updates and a sense of the action and activities on our progress against executing our plan to defeat COVID-19. One of the core elements of our plan is accelerating the process of vaccinating the country to protect people from COVID-19 as quickly and as safely as possible. For the past week, our 7-day average number of shots administered was 1.2 million per day. We view this number of 1 million doses per day as a base to build from in the coming days, weeks, and months. In total, we've now delivered 48 million doses, and 26 million of those doses have been administered. As I have said before, we're facing two challenges. The first is increasing the supply of vaccines safely and more rapidly, and speeding up the time it takes to administer them efficiently and, importantly, equitably. I want to call out 7 states that have already provided first vaccinations to more than 10% of their adult populations: Alaska, West Virginia, New Mexico, Connecticut, North Dakota, Oklahoma, and South Dakota. Well done. So we have taken steps to announce last week that we will increase supply week over week by 16% and vastly improve the predictability of ordering vaccines by giving everyone a 3-week forward window into how many vaccines they will be getting delivered. And we announced plans to purchase 200 million additional vaccines, which means that no matter what happens with other approvals, we will have sufficient supply to vaccinate the country. We're also taking steps to speed the vaccination administration process. At the President's direction, FEMA has increased its support to states, tribes, and territories for vaccination sites. FEMA is providing nearly $1 billion to support vaccination sites in states and territories. More than 200 FEMA staff members are on the ground today providing logistical support in 8 states. And the agency is providing federal equipment and supplies to support states across the country. In addition, we're getting more vaccinators into the field to continue to escalate the pace of vaccinations. Yesterday, the Department of Health and Human Services amended the PrEP Act declaration to permit recently retired doctors and nurses to administer COVID-19 vaccines and to permit anyone currently licensed to vaccinate within their home state. That's doctors, nurses, EMTs, to be able to administer shots across state lines. We're looking at every possible step to make it easier to get more vaccinations out in the field. We encourage individuals to contact their local and state health departments, their local medical reserve corps unit, to sign up to volunteer if they're qualified. And today, the acting Health and Human Services Secretary will continue the activation of the U.S. Public Health Service Commission Corps. He's requesting public health service officers from all available categories to support national COVID-19 vaccination efforts. I want to also touch on our efforts to make the workplace safer. The Department of Labor announced that its Occupational Safety and Health Administration, or OSHA, has issued stronger worker safety guidance to help employers and workers implement a coronavirus mitigation program and better identify risks which could lead to exposure and infection. Ensuring the health and safety of all of our country's workers is a national priority and a moral and economic imperative. Healthcare workers and other essential workers, many of whom are people of color, immigrants, have put their lives on the line during the coronavirus pandemic. And this updated guidance provides a roadmap for businesses to protect the health of their workers. Now, one of the purposes of these briefings is to demonstrate the transparency that's within our national plan. And so I want to close by mentioning some of the steps we're taking to improve public access to the information they should have at their fingertips to stay safe. This week, we released previously non-public data on the pandemic trends across all 50 states in detail. This detailed information was previously reserved solely for governors, and it is now available to everybody to see. These will be weekly reports publicly posted online. So our team is working hard to make the process more transparent and easier for the public to understand, beginning with these briefings and the very clear messages from Drs. Walensky and Fauci. So let me turn and spend the balance of our time taking questions for Dr. Walensky, Dr. Fauci, and myself.
Great. Thanks, Andy. Right now we have time for a couple of questions. If you have not already, you can go ahead and raise your hand on the Zoom feature. First up, we're going to go to Christopher Rowland at the Washington Post.
Yes, thank you. Thanks for doing the briefing. On the subject of the low dead space syringes, I was wondering what percentage of the administration kits now are being sent out with the Pfizer vaccine contain those specialized units? How many millions more do you need to get to 100%? And what companies are being ordered to procure more under the DPA? And also on the state allotments and Pfizer's credit, are state allotments based on 5 doses in the vial or 6? And is Pfizer getting credit for all 6 doses?
Thanks for the question. And at risk of somebody coming back and correcting my answer, I believe the answer is 100%. And they're getting credit for 6, precisely because everybody should now have the tools to be able to get the 6th Pfizer dose out. That's thanks to the work of our DPA and supply chain team. Next question.
Great. Next, we'll go to Caitlin Collins at CNN.
Thank you. I have two questions, actually. One on these new variants that we're seeing, and the expectation seems to be that they could really start to have an impact on cases by March, maybe gain a foothold by April and become the dominant cases that we're seeing. So what specifically is the administration doing to stop that from happening beyond recommending that people social distance and wear masks?
Well, let me turn first to Dr. Fauci to talk about the science behind these variants and what is likely to happen, or what we know or what we believe, and then to Dr. Walensky after that, so she can discuss the actions we're taking as a country and the actions we expect Americans to take to help with your question. Thank you.
Well, Caitlin, there are a number of variants that we're concerned about, and one that is quite well established already in the United States, and that is the 117 that is in about 28 or 29 states and more than 315 cases that have all been reported. As you alluded to, the fact is that when you have a virus that has ability to transmit more efficiently than the wild type in the community, sooner or later, by pure viral dynamics itself, it will become more dominant than the wild type. So we have that already there. We have a situation where there have now been reported in very specific places in South Carolina, for example, the isolate or the mutant that is the 351 from dominant in South Africa. Again, that seems to have a very good fitness for spread. So whether or not that's going to ultimately take over in the sense of being dominant is unclear by now. The projection that is made with regard to the UK is that probably by the end of March, the beginning of April, it actually will become more dominant in this country. As I mentioned at the very end of my remarks, I'll leave it to, in a moment, to Dr. Walensky to talk a bit about what we're doing from a surveillance and other standpoint. But the fundamental principle of getting people vaccinated as quickly and as efficiently as you possibly can will always be the best way to prevent the further evolution of any mutant, because when you do that, you prevent replication, and replication is essential for mutation. So over to you, Dr. Walensky.
Thank you, Dr. Fauci, and for that question. So there are numerous things that we are doing. As Dr. Fauci noted, the prevention measures, the mitigation measures for variants are actually exactly the same, regardless of what variant you have. We have scaled up surveillance dramatically just in the last 10 days, in fact. But our plans for scaling up surveillance are even more than what we've done so far. So we have partnerships with commercial labs. We are now asking surveillance from every single state, at least 750 surveillance strains per week. And we have 7 collaborations across universities to scale up surveillance to the thousands per week so that we can get a foothold as to see whether these projections of having this take hold by the middle of March or middle to late March are actually true. What we're also doing is offering support to the states that have identified these surveillances, specifically South Carolina with the 351 variant, reaching out to help with vaccination, as vaccination is, again, one of these things we need to do, with resources for increased testing, increased surveillance, as well as increased resources for vaccination and funding. So we're working hard to make sure that we can actually do the mitigation measures, the vaccination, do the surveillance. And then finally, we have cross-agency collaborations with CDC, NIH, BARDA, DOD, so that when we get these strains, we can do the science and understand the impact of these variants on our vaccines as well as on our therapeutics.
Let me add just one more comment. Look, if we as a country want to turbocharge our efforts at sequencing, which I believe should be a shared bipartisan perspective, we can do that. And what we need is the Congress to quickly pass the American Rescue Plan, which contains the resources necessary to get all of our very, very talented people around the country who are world experts at sequencing to get on this as quickly as possible. So I couldn't urge people and the Congress to be more focused on the American Rescue Plan than I can, given the state of the variants.
Maybe if I could make one more point, and that is that by the time someone has symptoms, gets a test, has a positive result, and we get the sequence, our opportunity for doing real case control and contact tracing is largely gone. And so I think, and I believe, that we should be treating every case as if it's a variant during this pandemic right now.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. Next.
Great. Now we'll go to Ed O'Keefe at CBS. Ed, I think you can speak. All right, Ed, we'll try to come back to you. In the meantime, let's go to Caroline Chen.
Hi, thanks for taking my question. This is a question for both Dr. Walensky and Dr. Fauci. So when epidemiologists talk about herd immunity, they often say about 70 or 80% of the population is the goal. Given that about 20% of the U.S. population is children, do you think it's important to have eligibility expanded to children for vaccination as soon as possible? And if so, what is being done to get to that goal?
Yes, that's a very good question. And in the candidates that we're talking about now, certainly the Moderna and the Pfizer, the two that have been given the EUA, we've already started on what's called an age de-escalation testing. What that means that you start off, for example, we know with one of the vaccines, it's 16, and then one is 18 years old. We're going to go down from 16 to 12, from 12 to 9. And what you do, because you don't want to have to, and I'll explain why in a moment, to go through an efficacy trial where you're involving tens of thousands of children to show efficacy. What you can do is in a much smaller trial, measured in hundreds to a couple of thousands, to do what we call safety and a phase 2A for immunogenicity. And if you can show that it's safe and that in fact it induces the kind of response that is reflective of the protection, namely the correlate of immunity, what you can do is then bridge that to the efficacy data that you got from the 30,000 trial with Moderna and the 44,000 trial that we did with Pfizer. So in direct answer to your question, over the next couple of months, we will be doing trials in an age de-escalation manner so that hopefully by the time we get to the late spring and early summer, we will have children being able to be vaccinated according to the FDA's guidance.
Thank you.
Dr. Walensky, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I was just going to add our current data from schools, from summer camps and whatnot also suggests that the children not only have decreased rates of symptoms, but have decreased rates of transmissibility. Those estimates for herd immunity are very much based on rates of transmissibility. And so what pertains to herd immunity among adults may be different among children.
Right. Thank you. Next question.
Great. We have time for two more. We are going to go to Sharon Lafreniere at New York Times.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So Dr. Fauci said that we're going to have to make new versions of the existing vaccines to combat the variants. And the vaccine makers have shown that they can design vaccines, but where is the extra manufacturing capacity going to come from? Aren't the vaccine makers already tapped out making the existing vaccines? So what's the plan for making revised vaccines and booster shots on top of that?
Thanks for the question. I think this question speaks to a larger issue because I think you could have asked that question with a number of different permutations, and that's the issue of contingency planning and making sure we have sufficient vaccines, sufficient manufacturing capacity, and enough space in our contracts to be able to make adjustments on the fly. And I would tell you that the Department of Health and Human Services, the FDA, the team led by Dr. Kessler, are currently hard at work answering all of those questions. So I will not use these briefings to talk about non-public information about specific companies. All I can tell you is those are exactly the right factors that we are thinking about. And I think to make a broader point, the teamwork between everybody here, between the NIH, the CDC, the FDA, and then our ability to understand what those factors are and turn it into actual actionable plans with the manufacturers is really important. And I've been incredibly impressed, at least so far, with that.
Great, and we'll send our last question to Yamiche at.
You cut off.
Hi, it's Yamiche Alcindor with PBS. Thanks so much for taking my question. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, great. I have two questions. The first is, it sounded like you were saying that we're vaccinating about 1 million people daily. I wonder if you can talk about what the goal would be, the average goal would be, and how quickly we ramp up to that average. Like, what would be a better average? And then I have a second question after that.
Well, so our 7-day average is 1.2 million per day. As I said, we view where we are today as a floor, not a ceiling. What we have tasked our team with is as many vaccines as possible into as many arms as possible. There are two constraints right now. The first is just continuing week after week to press to increase productions and find opportunities as they exist. That is a slow process. That doesn't happen overnight. The second, where I think there is opportunity, is to turn those vaccines produced into actual vaccinations more rapidly. And we've announced a number of steps to do that. So I'm not going to put out a different number today on what I'd like to see, other than to tell you that every day when the number comes out, all of us are breathlessly awaiting the number and looking for as high a number as possible, of course. I know you have another question, Yamiche.
And then I wanted to ask about the 2/3 of cases in Los Angeles County. It's been reported, came out in the last 2 months, or been reported in the last 2 months. One study said that the factor was this recent coronavirus surge of a new variant, Cal 2.20C. What more do we know about the LA variant, and what does that tell us about other big cities? Should we expect maybe a New York, a New Orleans variant? What is LA teaching us about what our big cities might be experiencing?
Thank you. Dr. Fauci, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, sure. Well, what it tells us is what I alluded to in one of my prior comments, that when you have a significant amount, and we certainly have that now, and I've had that very much so over the past couple of months with the very steep slope of acceleration of cases that we've seen, is that the virus will continue to mutate and will mutate for its own selective advantage. So if you have a lot of cases in Los Angeles and you have this mutant that you referred to, you can be almost certain that as long as there's a lot of virus circulating in the community, there will be the evolution of mutants, because that's what viruses do, particularly RNA viruses. And that's what I was referring to just a moment ago. You're giving the virus an opportunity to adapt. So when people make an immune response against it, particularly in someone like that might be immunosuppressed, where the virus stays in that person for a longer period of time, it gives the virus the chance to adapt to the forces, in this case, the immune response, that's trying to get rid of it. And that's where you get mutations. So if the question you were asking, which is very relevant, is that what do we think is happening in other cities? I think what the underlying issues that are going on in California and Los Angeles very likely are taking place throughout the country, which is one of the reasons why, as Dr. Walensky has said, that we are really ratcheting up our genomic surveillance capability and our ability to get that information in real time.
Dr. Walensky, anything you'd like to add? Or is that?
No,
okay.
I think we got it.
Okay. So I think what we're saying collectively is let's not be quite such polite hosts to this virus. Let's turn the tide and do like other countries who do everything possible to shut out the growth of this virus and make sure it's not welcome. Well, thank you all for attending the briefing. I hope that this is useful to you. We intend to continue to do these every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday with the same group, and we will bring others on as well. So if you have any feedback on how we can continue to share this information with the public, please let us know. Thank you and have a great weekend.
All right, you've been watching for the last 35 minutes or so a briefing by the White House Coronavirus Task Force. A couple of interesting notes, Anne-Marie. One, that Dr. Fauci backs the CDC's recommended school reopenings plans, which I think a lot of parents have been talking about, worried about, and they do believe that it is safe for children to be in schools, and if they're closed, they should be the first to reopen. The other thing that he mentioned, which I thought was interesting, was with regards to the variants and the mutations of the virus that we've seen over the last couple of weeks or so. And he underscored, Dr. Fauci did, how necessary it is to get those mass vaccinations happening as quickly as possible, because we're going to continue. This is a little concerning. We're going to continue to see, Dr. Fauci says, mutations of the coronavirus. So the sooner we're all vaccinated, the better we'll be able to combat those mutations as they start to crop up.
Yeah, and I also thought Dr. Lewinsky, the new head of the CDC, when she was talking about the variants, I thought she, it was very interesting that she said by the time people have symptoms, it is too late to track, any contacts they may have had. And so the current approach is to, view every illness as a possible variant. But then comes up the question, and there was a journalist that asked this question, if we're already sort of maximizing our ability to produce vaccines and get them out and get them into people's arms, how then are these companies and is the infrastructure going to be able to handle a booster shot to deal with, at this point, we're talking about perhaps 3 different variants that we're aware of, maybe more. How are we going to sort of ramp up to get to that level if we can't get people inoculated before more and more variants emerge? Right now, the variant that was first identified in South Africa is here. We know we have 2 cases. 2 cases in South Carolina, I think it is, Vlad, people who did not travel in different parts of the state, which probably gives you an indication that that variant has probably been around, more than we know. And so those people were able to come in contact with it, somebody else who probably didn't even realize they were infected in any way. So it truly is concerning. We know that they are implementing as many things as they can.
Anne-Marie,
you know what? Speaking of that,
there you go.
Let's dip into the White House where you can see the president and a vice president speaking.
Inaction is high. The cost of inaction is high, and it's growing every day. Crisis itself is accelerating. 900,000 more Americans filed for unemployment insurance, and this week alone, 30 million Americans don't have enough food to eat this week. And interest rates are at historic lows, and the return on smart investments in the economy have never been higher. And it's not just me saying this. As I said, it's a consensus among the vast majority of leading economists in the country. As I said, left, right, and center, including advisors to former President Trump and George W. Bush. And so I've been meeting all morning with other folks as well. The notion here is we have to act now. There's no time for any delay. And so we can end up with 4 million fewer jobs this year, according to Moody's, a Wall Street firm, and it could take a year longer to return to full employment if we don't act and don't act now. We could see an entire cohort of kids with a lower lifetime earnings because they're deprived of another semester of school. Millions of parents, and maybe some of you, millions of parents are, particularly moms, are forced to stay home, reducing the family wages, and if they're a single wage earner, it's really difficult, and future job prospects that they have no choice but to stay home and take care of their children. Millions of people are out of work, unemployed. Future millions are held back for no good reason other than our failure to act. So the choice couldn't be clearer. We have learned from past crises the risk is not doing too much, the risk is not doing enough. And this is the time to act now. I've asked Secretary Yellen, who's been leading this effort, to come in and we're going to go into some detail among ourselves, but I think she has a statement to make as well.
Thank you very much,
Madam
Mr.
Secretary.
President. Well, there is a huge amount of pain in our economy right now, and it was evident in the data released yesterday. Over 1 million people applied for unemployment insurance last week, and that's far more than in the worst week of the Great Recession. And economists agree that if there's not more help, many more people will lose their small businesses, the roofs over their heads, and the ability to feed their families. And we need to help those people before the virus is brought under control. The President's American Rescue Plan will help millions of people make it to the other side of this pandemic. And it will also make some smart investments to get our economy back on track. I want to emphasize the President is absolutely right. The price of doing nothing is much higher than the price of doing something, and doing something big. We need to act now, and the benefits of acting now and acting big will far outweigh the costs in the long run.
Mr. President, what do you think of the Johnson & Johnson results?
Let's go. Thank you, guys.
I'm waiting to hear from my team. I'm waiting to hear from the team on the detail of it. I saw the news reported this morning. I haven't had a chance to speak with Dr. Fauci. One point I want to make that the Secretary made, and let's get this straight. It's not only that people will be badly, badly hurt if we don't pass this package in terms of increased rate of death, in terms of poverty, a whole range of things. But we will also be hurt long-term economically. We need to make these investments so the economy can grow the remainder of this year and next year. The investments now will help the economy grow. It will not, in fact, put a drag on the economy as spending this money. It'll do the exact opposite. So thank you all very much.
Thank you, guys.
Did you discuss GameStop?
Let's go. Thank you. Come on, guys. Thank you.
All right, you've been listening to a very brief, what we call a spray in the news business, which is the President of the United States or another official invites reporters into a room to make a few comments to members of the press. In that particular case, the President was with the Treasury Secretary, Janet Yellen, along with the Vice President of the United States, Kamala Harris. And there was not a lot of news coming out of this, Anne-Marie. I think, what they really wanted to discuss amongst themselves was this passage of the COVID relief bill. A lot of people you could hear were asking questions about GameStop, which, is on a lot of people's minds right now. The big board is down significantly. It's down over 400 points. At this point, and GameStop, on the other hand, is down up, or is up big. I think we can throw up the big board, right? Do we have that? There we go. So 398 points, and GameStop, on the other hand, is roaring back from getting shellacked yesterday. It's above. I had a stock alert in my brokerage account, Anne-Marie, to notify me if it went above $400. Well, that came right away. I remember thinking to myself yesterday, let me set it kind of high because it's gotten knocked down below 300 right now. Let me set it a little bit higher than what I expected it and how it closed the previous couple of days. So I set it at 400. Well, it blew through that really easily.
Yeah. Well, I mean, a good part of the reason why it plummeted is because Robinhood, stopped allowing trading on its app, and then today they changed it and they allowed, at least I think, for some limited trading, and that turned everything around. So when we thought this was going to be a 2-day story, Vlad, I don't know about that. Something tells me we'll be talking about this next week too, depending on how things go.
Yeah, for sure.
That being said. Yeah, we have a lot of news to get to, though, still to come. The backlash and the fallout in the House after revelations that Georgia GOP Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene supported violence against her own colleagues in a Facebook post, and the long-shot effort by Democrats to remove her from office now. That's up ahead. You are streaming CBSN, CBS News, always on.
This could be the worst that you've